Hey everybody, Ugly Shader here, and this is part one in a short series of videos that'll basically serve as kind of a how-to guide for the Ugly Sky. If you don't know, the Ugly Sky is a procedural sky generator I put together that kind of serves like a make your own HDRI feature in Blender. You just add it to whatever scene you're working on and play with settings until you like the way it looks, and there you go, you got a background. Now, this first video is going to cover just that, adding it to the scene and the basics of, how to turn pieces or parts of it on and off, as well as some of its limitations some of its limitations. And at the end of the video, we'll go over real quick how to set a camera up in the scene if you're wanting to use it in an empty scene simply to render out some environment textures to be used for other situations or in other softwares. The very first part of the video is just going to cover adding it to your scene or getting it in there, which is all covered in the README. So if you've been through the README and you're already, ready to start figuring out how to turn things on and off and stuff like that, we'll go ahead and just skip forward in the video. I'll do my best to remember to put a timestamp into the description that says where you should skip to. For the rest of us, we can go ahead and just get started. If you did not read the README, I am going to cover some of what the README went over, just, precautionary stuff and things like that. In fact, I'll jump right into that right now. First things first, I do not suggest opening the blend file that came in the download as a blend file, like putting it into Blender and opening it up. The way it's meant to be added to a scene is that you append it. If you do want to open the original blend file, I suggest opening it in Blender version 2.83.0. That is the last version it was worked on in. Therefore, if you open it in that version, at least you can be sure that, nothing funny is going to happen or change as you open it. It does have one restriction in that the version that is available upon release. However, if you're listening to this video at a later date and time, there may be another version available. However, the initial release version is not compatible with Blender 2.80 and below. Unfortunately, when they made the change from 2.80 to 2.81 alpha, some things in the back end of Blender, in the data paths and the property names and so on and so forth changed. If you try to append the sky to Blender 2.80 or 2.79 or anything like that, it's not going to look right, and without a couple hundred hours worth of work, it's not going to be able to look right. So don't even waste your time. I am planning a release of a version that is compatible with the older versions of Blender. Unfortunately, it probably will not be available till near the end of the first quarter of 2021. Again, though, if you're watching this, video months and months in the future, you probably don't have to worry about that. However, if you are using it for an older version of Blender, at the end of this series, I will release a quick short video going over how to append it to those other older versions of Blender with the older version, because setting up world environments was just a little bit different in, like Blender 2.79 and stuff like that. So I will release a video to cover that stuff. Other than that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Provided you're using Blender version uh, 2.81 alpha or above, everything should work no problems. I'm currently in 2.91.0, so everything from 2.81 up through here, the process is like identical, and unless they make more large changes in the back end of Blender, I do not foresee it breaking anytime soon with new versions of Blender. If it does at some point, there's a good chance, depending upon, feedback from the community and overall demand for the product, that I will rebuild it again, so as to keep it up to date with newer versions of Blender. But as is, unless they change something big, there's probably not going to be any problem using it in future versions of Blender beyond 2.91. All right, something to note. I am using 2.7x series shortcuts. Always have, probably always will. So I'll try to remember that and avoid using shortcuts that might not be available in the newer shortcut formats, Blender 2.83 and above or whatever. Anyhow, so here we have our scene, and as the README states, the first step is to make sure that nothing in our scene has a name that matches the names of what's coming in. Because when you append this chunk of world data to your scene, it is going to come with a collection of objects. They're all sun lamp objects, and by default, they're all off, so they won't have any influence or anything like that on the appearance of your scene. But it does come with those objects, and those objects have a bunch of data paths and properties tied to them. So it's just in general a good idea to make sure that nothing in your scene shares a name with what's going to be coming in. I mean, if you do append, it's not like it's going to crash Blender if you have something with matching names, but it will rename what is coming in to be a copy of what was originally there. As a result of that, it is possible, not a guarantee, but it is possible that some of the data paths will no longer function properly. There is a list in the README of the items that get or not imported, but appended with the world data. So just run through that list real quick and make sure that nothing in your scene matches. I'm going to delete this light real quick, not because it matches. Nothing in this scene matches name-wise, but it comes with its own lights, so we don't need a lamp in here. We're not making a scene that actually requires some point lighting or anything like that. And since we're not doing anything like that, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that cube as well. Now, next step is make sure you're on an appropriate render engine. This procedural background does not like Eevee. I do apologize for that. It's unfortunate. It's just the way that Cycles handles the information generated by the shader networks versus how Eevee handles it is really different in too many key points, and it just does not work. You can try, but odds are you're just going to get a white, blank, ugly background. And you're probably going to have to wait a couple minutes to be able to see it because Blender will lock up while it's trying to think about things. You'll get the not responding that, it's not that Blender isn't doing things. It's just so busy it stopped talking to Windows, basically, or whatever your operating system is. But yeah, Blender will stop responding for a minute if you try to use this with Eevee while it tries to figure things out, and then it ultimately fails. For reference on performance, just so anybody watching the video has a comparison and can, have an idea of how things might perform on their system, this is a really lightweight setup provided you're not trying to look at the actual node network. But other than that, it's a really light setup. But just for reference, I am on a somewhat more powerful system. It's a gaming laptop. It's got an i9-8950HK 6-core, if I can remember right, and 32 gigs of DDR4 at 2600 something speed, and one of the baseline RTX 2080s or whatnot. But a good majority of this guy was built on a really, really just weak system. And that's simply a testament to the fact that if you're not trying to edit the nodes or control the nodes directly, it's really lightweight. You almost wouldn't realize it was there. But, anyway, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent. We're going to go ahead and switch over to Cycles. And because this has a GPU in it, I am going to go ahead and use the GPU it's got. Viewport doesn't really matter. I'll leave it at 32, but this thing renders like crystal clear in one sample because it's all two-dimensional and in the world background. So you don't need a real high sample count at all to get average or decent quality imagery out of it. Okay, so anyway, now that we're all set up, GPU, Cycles, all that, however you need to be set up, just make sure you're on Cycles, we're going to append it to our scene. Now, with the 2.79 shortcuts or just 2.7 series shortcuts, you can just hit Shift F1. But for those running newer versions of Blender and the newer shortcuts, I don't think that's a shortcut anymore. So you click on File and just go to Append, and you select Append. It pulls this window up for you, and then you just have to navigate to where the blend file is. For me, that's going to be in Art, and I got it right there. And once you've opened that up, it'll pull up this list, and this is literally just the stuff that is in the blend file. This is your blend file. We're after the world data blocks and stuff like that, so we go into the world, and as you can see, it's right there. It's named, so it's hard to miss, and it's the only thing in there. You can either click on it and hit append, or you can just double click it. And poof, here we go. We got a collection of lines, which are the light paths for the sun lamps it added. And over here, you can see in our outliner, a whole bunch of stuff got added in. Now there's 22 items. There are 10 types of clouds, Earth-style night stars, 3 sets of light pollution, a moon, a sun, 5 planets, and a gaseous nebulous sky. Now, right away, if I go ahead and switch over to rendered view, which, sorry, Shift Z, you can't do that in newer versions. If I click this button up here and go to rendered view, you can see that nothing has changed. And you know what? We don't need that on the screen. We don't need those on the screen, sorry. So you can see that nothing has changed. And we just have a default gray environment. And that's because when we appended it, it added the items and all of their properties and the node network to our Blender file, but it did not add them directly to the scene. I mean, obviously the lights got added to the active collection, but the scene itself, the data for the scene, the world data still isn't associated with it. So in our properties window, we come down to the world properties. And as you can see right here, this is the data that is currently our background. If I hover over it, you can see world data block describing the environment and ambient lighting. So this is basically our background. Right now it's at worlds. Well, we appended ugly sky. So all we got to do is click on the little icon next to it, and it brings up a list of what is available. By default, just the world is available, but we added a new option. So we go ahead and select that option. As you can see, everything went black, and that's because by default, like I said, when you add this into your scene, it doesn't have any effect on it. And that's because all of these are turned off. There's no lighting, there's no imagery, textures being generated in the background, nothing is on, so it has no effect. And that's how you get it in your scene. From here, you are done with the get it there process. Now it's just a matter of playing around with it, turning things on and using what you want. And that's actually really straightforward and simple. Everything is just based off of the names of the objects. Again, they are all light sun lamp objects, but each one has a name to represent the portion of the sky that it controls. The sun and the daytime sky are linked on the sun property, just because, I mean, the sun's basically being generated as part of the daytime sky. So they're part of the same option. So all we do if we want to turn the sun on is we select sun. And then in our properties window here, we come to the object properties. You never have to look at the nodes in this, and that's part of why it stays so lightweight while you're using it. Because if you try, in fact, I give you an example. If we switch this over to the shader editor, and you can see I got nice fast movements. It's all blurring across my screen, good performance, so on and so forth. If I go ahead and try and switch this over to the world editor, and be mindful, this is, I mean, it's a mobile processor, but it is 6 cores, 12 threads, running an average of 4.3 to 4.5 gigs per core. It's got the RTX 2080 and the 32 gigs of RAM. It's not a real weak system. But if I switch this over to the world editor and try and drag those nodes around again, you can see that there is obviously some hang time in the performance of the system. And I mean, it's bad. You load this up and try and look at the nodes on a real weak system, and it is a slow process to try and navigate these. If you are opening it up and trying to, understand how things are working and learn from them and stuff like that, just a heads up, this large green box is the sun, the daytime sky, and the moon, and like technically I guess you could call it the moon sky attributes, like the glow that the moon might add to the sky, the ring in the sky around the moon when it's all bright and shiny, stuff like that. That's all in this green box. These large blue boxes here, each one is a different type of clouds. Cloud type 1, type 2, type 3, so on and so forth. Ugh, drag over. Okay, these large gray boxes represent the 10 different or five, sorry, five different planets, and each one is its own planet. This little purple box here, which didn't look so little when I started this project, but yeah, it's one of the smallest now. Anyway, this is the Earth time night stars. This orange box here is the gaseous nebula sky, and then these two smaller boxes here, as well as all of this stuff here, is all just it's just like mixers and color adjustments and masking features and so on and so forth to combine the different portions of the sky together so that they interact in a way that hopefully would be expected. I'm going to switch that back out of that though, because that lag is just hurting me. 3D viewport. Yeah, back to here. And yeah, the whole everything's hanging is only an issue if you're trying to actually look at the nodes. Thankfully, though, you don't have to. As I was saying before I went to go show you these, everything is controlled through their own properties. Anyhow, real quick before we get to those properties, you may have noticed that the rotation has two values that are purple. If you are unaware of why value in Blender might turn purple, or you've never seen purple values in Blender, that's simply an indicator that it is currently controlled by a driver, meaning there is a piece of programming that is controlling this number based on something else somewhere else in the scene or in Blender itself. If you look at the node setup, you're going to see lots of purple numbers. But on occasion, when selecting one of these objects, say you have your transforms panel open in the little 3D viewport properties window or whatnot, you'll see some purple values. When you see stuff like that, just remember it's just got a driver on it. That's why it's purple. Something to note though is that properties that are driven by something else that are linked to a driver cannot be manually controlled. So if I try and drag this, you can see I can change the number 500, 700, 900, so on and so forth. But as soon as I let go of my mouse button, it's going to return to whatever it was. I can click on it and try and type numbers in, and it does it. Oh, I did not know you could do that. I've never actually tried to bypass a driver value. So I guess if you click on it and type numbers in, you can bypass it. That's neat. I didn't know that. Fair enough. Oh, that didn't bypass it. I just typed in 90 and it went to 5157, which is not 90. And there's no decimal point in there. That's 5157. So it just converted my 90 radians into degrees when I typed in there. So, yeah, I wouldn't suggest doing that anyway. So yeah, purple numbers are controlled by drivers, and generally, if you're just clicking and not typing, if you're just dragging or trying to click the arrows, you have no control over them, and you'll get an error somewhere on your screen that says can't edit driven number value. So no worries there. If you see the purple, it's no big deal. Okay, sorry about that tangent there. So back to the sun. We're going to start with the sun, and we're just going to go over real quick, turning things on and off. The next videos will cover, individual features of them. But yeah, so if you want to use a part of the sky, you just select it out of the list in your outliner window as far as whatever object has the name of what you want. In this case, I have sun selected. You come into your properties window, you go to object properties, and then you open up the custom properties tab. I'm gonna go ahead and drag this over a little bit, zoom those up a bit, and I'm gonna drag this up a little bit too. Okay, so now first thing to make note of is you might see ant landscape, and if you're watching this video like months and months from now, and the backwards compatible version or the version of the sky to work with older versions of Blender has been released, it's possible you might also see oh, what was it? It'd been a while since I've looked at that window, an old version of Blender. You might see Blender API and like Blender API control format or something like that. I don't remember the names of them, but those are just default custom properties that Blender tends to add. You may also have others in your list that are associated with different add-ons and stuff like that that you have. Those properties, just ignore them. The ones that are actually associated with the object, like in most situations, unless you have a bunch of add-ons and when you're using a newer version of Blender, the only one you should see is the ant landscape. And I guess you might not see that if you don't have the ANT landscape add-on turned on. If you don't, though, you should. It's built into Blender and it's super useful, especially seeing as how it works with weight painting. Anyway, so yeah, you pick the item of the sky that you want to use, and then you simply turn it on. Now, a lot of them have control values that are uh, on off, like the planets 1 through 5, all 10 types of clouds. Instead of a fadable gradient, it's just on or off. But that's because in their individual lists, they have different control points or different properties that allow them to be faded and stuff like that. So yeah, you simply turn on whichever item or part of the sky that you want. And the on off switch for all of them is at the top. I will tell you though, some of the names seem a little confusing. Like, well, I put a hashtag at the beginning of it, a pound sign for, those of us old enough to know that that's a pound sign. Anyway, there's a pound sign or a hashtag at the beginning of all of them. And that's because the lists are alphabetically ordered. So something that starts with a symbol is always going to start at the top of the list versus numbers or letters. And that way the on off switch is always at the top of the list of all of the different features of the sky. Um, but yeah, some of them will have kind of weird names like Nebula Sky. It's pound sign 3 Nebula Sky. Ignore the 3. Simply, that was there in an earlier version of the sky when all of the custom properties were on a single list. And that allowed all of the on-off features to be at the top, and they were listed differently, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, at some point in the future that may get changed, but changing this name right here involves also the requirement of changing driver values, the location drivers are looking, so on and so forth, stuff like that. So they just kind of got left with their original name, but moved to a new object. I do apologize for that, but hopefully it won't get on anybody's OCD tendencies too much, and they'll tolerate just that number there. Sorry. But anyway, so yeah, you just turn on or off the feature you want. All of the sliders are named. So sky cloud 05 star mask, sun glow, sky hue 1 offset. And in the videos that will continue in this series, we'll go through a lot of these all one by one, discussing what they do and how to play with them, so on and so forth. But if you're ever curious, another benefit is that they all tend to have descriptions. So all you got to do is hover over the numbers of any of the values, and you should get a general description of its features and functions. Hopefully, I'll catch all the typos that are in there before final release, but no promises. Sorry if you see typos. Anyway, so yeah, if you're ever curious about a property, or if you need to know if a property has dependencies that it's based off of, all you got to do is just hover over one of the numbers, and it'll go ahead and give you a description of what the property is supposed to do. And that's the same for all of the lists for all of the features of the sky. They all have descriptions, and all of their names more or less give you an indication as to what their intended function is. All right, so now it's time to talk about the I don't even know what to call it. The big limit inside Blender. Okay, I'm sorry. Hold on. That size is killing me. I don't know why I had it so big, but that's better. All right, so there is an inherent limitation when it comes to procedurally generated characters, or sorry, not characters, materials and textures. There's an internal limit in Blender. It just, it's part of writing a program. You have to account for everything when you write a program. Every input type, input variable, everything. And one of the things you have to account for is like how big something can be, how long a chunk of code can be, how many variables can be used in an equation, so on and so forth. And you have internal limits. There's no way to avoid it. Well, I'm not sure what the actual limit is, but somewhere around, I'd say, 1,500 to 2,000 or so active nodes, or maybe it's like 1,000 to 1,500 active nodes contributing all at the same time to a single material, and you reach that internal limit in Blender. It doesn't crash, it doesn't break anything, nothing dies on you, but it can no longer handle what it's supposed to be trying to calculate, and it just defaults to nothing. So we'll go ahead and give you an example of that real quick. Let's turn on some clouds like one. Oh, that's distortion. Oops. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so let's. How about some down on the? Hey, down on the horizon. Um, and you know what? You might mix in pretty well. Kind of covered up a lot of the beginning, and it doesn't mesh with that real well. But whatever. We have three different types of clouds turned on currently. Let's turn the moon on. I know it's daytime, but who cares? It's probably up there behind the clouds somewhere. Who knows? But it's on now. Let's turn on the nebula sky. Why not? Now we got crazy stars in the background all over the place and stuff like that. All right, now let's turn on some planets. And the planets are the real backbreakers. The nebula sky and the planets are probably about tied for the amount of nodes that they have. But when the planet's on, all of its nodes are active. And that's not always the case in the nebula sky. Sometimes certain features of it aren't actually outputting any information. Or if they are, it's just zeros, it's just black data. So the planets generally tend to be the backbreakers when it comes to having too much on at once. So we have three types of clouds: the nebulous starry sky, the moon, the sun, the day sky. And let's see, planet one, we are okay. Oh, there's a planet. Planet two, we are okay. Yep, there's a planet hiding in the clouds or behind them up there. Planet three. And there we go. We have now reached that internal limit in Blender. And as you can see, our output has defaulted to nothing. Now, everything's fine. Nothing broke. It's just we're trying to create a material or a texture with too much information now, and it can no longer run the calculations on everything. So it doesn't try. It defaults to nothing. If you ever reach that point, all you got to do is just turn something back off. You got too much on. And it's not very easy to reach that point. Again, we have the nebulous sky, the sun, the moon, and three of the types of clouds on. Let's turn on four. Okay, now it's four types, five types, six types, seven types, eight types. Five was already on. Nine. So yeah, we have eight types of clouds: the nebulous sky, the sun, the day sky, and the moon, all active. And I mean, this looks horrible at this point. If you were going to have this many types of clouds turned on, they would definitely need to be adjusted to be, much smaller and much fewer of them so that they could layer more appropriately. But yeah, it's honestly, when it comes to creating a background that is suitable, that isn't completely full and overbearing, it's pretty easy to stay underneath the internal limit. I mean, if you're on a planet and you turn a bunch of clouds on, odds are you're probably not going to be using all five of the planets because there's not going to be enough open sky to see all five of the planets. Or if you have all five of the planets on, well, you're probably not going to be using a bunch of other stuff like the clouds that's going to get in the way of those planets, and so on and so forth. So the fact that the planets tend to be the heaviest load burden on the network is generally for the best, because when you're using the planets, you're oftentimes using less of the network. And when you are using more of the other parts of the network, you either aren't using or you're using fewer of the planets. It generally balances out, though, to the extent that you don't really have to worry about hitting that limit in most reasonable situations. So, yeah, I think that covers it for the limits. You don't use it in Eve because it and Eve don't play together, and if you end up making it to nothing but a black background, well, there's just probably too much on. Another thing to keep note about it is that the way it's set up, a lot of these objects, if you do not want them in your scene anymore, can be deleted. Now, that is going to delete the object from the scene. It's also going to delete the list of custom properties associated with it. However, it should just kick its property values to their defaults. And if you're ever curious about what a default value is for a property, they are listed. All you have to do is find the property you want to look at and click the edit button next to it, and you can see what its current value is, what its default value is, what its set minimums and maximums are, and so on and so forth. And also, if you ever find a value that you're like, well, I wish I could just adjust that a little bit further than what is predefined in the slider to see what would happen, simply come in and change the minimum and maximum values to suit what it is you're wanting to change it to. The whole idea was that this thing can be set up so that you have access to some, and I say some because I mean there's a lot of possibilities, but it gives you access to some of what Blender procedural nodes are capable of when it comes to creating a background in the environment without you having to worry about knowing how to use the nodes, knowing how they're connected, or even having to look at them in order to adjust or control things. All of it, like 100%, all of it, that matters anyways. I mean, there are some values in the node network that do not have properties or drivers on them, but pretty much every value that matters has its own slider and control property that is in a list with a name and a description. So yeah, that pretty much covers how to get it in and how to start playing with it. Now, real quick, if you're wanting to render it out to use it as environmental textures for your scenes, particularly if you're wanting to use the skies that you have from your cycle render of the sky, if you want to use that in Eve, it's actually a really easy way to set that up. Now, all you got to do is grab your camera and make sure that you don't have anything else in your scene other than what came in with the ugly sky, just its lamps, basically. So you grab your camera and you pull up your little, 3D viewport properties window. And for the item, we just want to go ahead and set its location to default, which is, the 0 point of the world origin, the very middle of the world, basically. For rotation, I'm going to go ahead and set to zeros real fast. And that has us pointing straight down, and the top of the camera is there. So technically we're looking at this orientation. This is our up and that's our down. However, if we're rendering out a sky that has a sun and clouds and everything like that, we want our camera oriented to the horizontal plane of the world. So that's a value of 90 degrees on the x-axis. And there you go. All you got to do is put your camera right there with those values. And as far as the render engine concerns, that means your sensor, your camera sensor, is directly in the center of the world origin. Now you can close that window back up. And for me, that's the N key. I don't know if that has changed in newer versions of Blender because, again, I'm still using the 2.7 shortcuts. Anyhow, so with our camera selected, we need to change its data properties, the data properties for the camera. That's in our properties window, and since it's a camera selected, it's actually a camera icon. They made it all super easy for us, or at least they have these days. So we go into the data properties for the object, and right here at the top we have our lens. Currently, it's in a perspective lens, which is like a normal camera or, looking at something with your eyes, so on and so forth. We want to switch it to a panoramic view. And if I hit 0 to look through my camera, you can see that's not right at all. And that's because it's currently the lens is a fisheye lens, and we don't want a fisheye lens. We want to switch this to the equirectangular lens, or the panorama type. And what that has done, it has now stretched the environment out to be that. What is that white thing? Hold on a second. Oh, I left the moon on. I am like, what is that white bar? You know what? That's perfect that I left that on. The moon is directly overhead right now, so that actually helps illustrate the way that this creates an image. Basically, it took the 360-degree sphere that is the environment we're in and cut it, seamed it, and stretched it so that it could be laid out in a two-dimensional image format. And this is how, or the format that you use when rendering out environment textures, or like HDR eyes, how it looks like a weird stretched out image until you use it as an environment texture, and then it's like a sphere around you. That's exactly what this is doing. So if you want to be able to use the backgrounds that you create with this in Eve or in other softwares, or simply as its original intended purpose was actually to be able to create quickly animatable skyboxes for video games. So if that's what you're after, so on and so forth, this is all you have to do. You simply put your camera in the middle of the world, set it to panoramic, and set the panorama type to equal rectangular. One thing I would also suggest doing is in your output properties, go to your output, and under file format, if you're going to be rendering things out like this, go ahead and switch it to an OpenEXR multilayer. And that way it'll save all of the individual pixel information as far as its brightness, gamma, color, the effects that it has on the environment around it, so on and so forth. And that way it can act like an HDR image. So as I said near the beginning, it's kind of like a make your own HDRI option. And I suppose with the nebulous sky, that does look kind of interesting and not like what most people might expect if they are used to traditional like Earth style imagery for HDRIs. So there you go. There's the sun, the horizon's been separated out, the bottom half of the environment and the top half of the environment. So it's your make your own HDRI program, or add-on, whatever. I was going to make it an actual add-on, but the version compatibility issues seem to be more forgiving with it being something that you append to your file. So those of you that would like it as an add-on, I'm sorry, it's probably not going to happen, just so that it doesn't have to be rebuilt and reworked in order to maintain compatibility as often. But there you have it. There's how to get it in and how to start playing with it. And the videos that come after this will start talking about the different features, and we'll go more in depth. The next video is going to go over the sun and maybe dabble in the clouds a little bit. The video after that will probably cover clouds. After that, we'll hit the Earth, night stars, the moon, and light pollution in the will that be the third video at that point, I think? Yeah, third or fourth. Anyway, and then after that, the video after that will cover the nebula and the 5 different types of planets. Well, they're actually all the exact same. So it'll cover the nebula and one planet, and the description for one planet is valid for the 4 others because they're all just copies of each other. So yeah, I think that wraps up this video. We'll pick up in the next one here where we left off, and we'll start playing with the sun. Thanks for listening. If you bought the sky, thank you very much. And as always, enjoy creating things your way.